My name is Suzanna Martinez, and I was once upon a time at NPI, where I started working with Lorraine on food insecurity in college students, mainly in the UC system. We conducted one of the first studies of food insecurity in the UC system, and since then we've just continued to expand the work. So today, Erin, Esaryk, and I will be presenting to you our research on redefining basic needs and assessing housing insecurity in higher education. Okay. Why is my slide not? Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is our research team. We have Erin on, I guess that will be your right side. Erin has been working with me since she was an intern at MPI. And one of the first projects that she started to work with me on was the study of housing insecurity in the UC system, which was funded by the Global Food Initiative, which was also the same initiative that funded the very first study of food insecurity. And then on the bottom, we have Ellie Jimenez, who is also a research assistant with me and also contributed to the work that you will see. And then on the left side are Ruben and Tim, who are like the co-conspirators of this work, and really like important because they're the ones who've really been lifting UC basic needs, as a big issue, and have presented so much of the work and the progress to the UC regents. And because of it, the UC system is really taking this work very seriously. And then there's me, and I'm at UCSF now. So just a little landscape, we'll go over, well, this is an overview. Erin's going to present to you the landscape of the research, and then some of the current housing insecurity tools that have already been used in the field, but how we've been building on those. Our focus group research that we conducted, where we found themes related to student basic needs. We'll go over our basic needs framework, and then we'll end with the recommendations that we have provided to mainly to the regents, these regents. Okay. Oh, Erin, sorry, I think I started like presenting for you, so I'll let you go now. Sorry.
Thank you.
Oops, and now I'm going, okay, go for it.
Okay, so to start, we know that the cost of attending college is higher than ever. And this includes not only tuition, but most of it is other costs of paying for students' basic needs like food and housing and transportation. That makes up 60% of the overall cost of attendance, and these costs are especially high in California. And if we look at the cost of attendance over time, it's been steadily increasing. So today it's at an all-time high. And in the University of California in particular, it's higher than the national average. So these high costs have implications for students' basic needs and their ability to cover the costs of food and housing. Next slide. So given these high costs, researchers have started paying attention to the high prevalence of food and housing insecurity among students in California. So among the California State University system, they found that 9% of students were experiencing homelessness. And in community college systems, they found very high prevalences of food insecurity, over 60%, and also high rates of homelessness. So this is a kind of calling attention to this need to address students' basic needs. Next slide. So when we look at this in the UC system, we also see high prevalence of food and housing insecurity and homelessness. And then when we stratify it by subgroup, this is from the UQ's undergraduate experience survey. We find that in some subgroups, it's even higher. So especially Black and Latinx students experience higher rates of food insecurity and homelessness, and students who come from low income families or transfer students. So we know more about food insecurity, but less about student homelessness and housing insecurity. And we have few or no validated standardized measures of homelessness and housing insecurity. So the prevalences and the accuracy of the measures may vary because we lack these standardized measures of housing insecurity and homelessness for students. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where the measures we have for student homelessness come from. So the definition of homelessness from, we have a definition of youth homelessness from the McKinney-Vento Act from the US Department of Education. And that is used to track youth homelessness in California up to grade 12. So this definition is used as the basis for the survey instruments that we have for college student homelessness. And next slide. So that definition from the McKinney-Vento Act is this: lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. And then they provide examples like sleeping in a motel, a car, a tent, and because you lack regular nighttime residence. So this is the instrument used by the UC system to track student homelessness. So they ask this single question: since attending UC, have you ever been homeless for any of these lengths of time? And then they provide this definition from the McKinney-Vento Act underneath the question. So it requires the student to identify as being homeless and by reading the definition, and then indicating at what time point in the academic year they experience that. Oh, next slide. But other researchers like Dr. Rashida Crutchfield and Jennifer McGuire at the California State University system have done more to develop a more comprehensive module for student homelessness. So they ask the question, since starting college, have you ever been homeless? And then they also provide this module that that asks the students where they've slept in the last 30 days and the last 12 months. So, and then they ask about all these different possible places where the student may have slept, some of which would be considered homeless, like circled in pink, at a shelter, in a camper. So this is a helpful way of asking the question, because students may not want to identify with being homeless because it's a stigmatizing kind of word. So while they may not identify as being homeless, they may be willing to say that they slept in a camper or at a shelter. So this provides more accurate and comprehensive information on student homelessness. And they found that when they asked it in this way, they had a higher, the rate of homelessness was higher than if they asked the students just if they've been homeless without breaking it out into these different categories. Oh, next slide. So those were measures related to homelessness, but when it comes to housing insecurity, we have even fewer survey instruments. So the Hope Center did some work to develop a measure of housing insecurity for students, and they got their module from the US Census, the Survey of Income and Program Participation, the SIP. So they took the module used to quantify housing insecurity in US adults, and then applied that to college students. So if a student indicated that they had experienced any of these items, then they would be considered having experienced housing insecurity. Oh, next slide. So that leads me to talking about our report. So these other researchers kind of laid the foundation for us to be able to build upon these measures and pilot them in a group of University of California students. So if you want to read the full report, you can find it on the UC website. That's this Redefining Student Basic Needs in Higher Education. And we have a peer-reviewed publication in the American Journal of Health Promotion where you can find a shorter version of our study at that citation there. So our purpose in conducting the study was to pilot the existing instruments, those that I reviewed, of student housing insecurity and homelessness. So that includes the measure from the California State University system, Hope Lab Housing Insecurity Instrument, and the UC instrument. And then our second aim was to explore student experiences of housing and food insecurity, which we did through focus groups with students in the University of California system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our study sample. So we had a targeted recruitment where we tried to get students who had likely experienced food and housing insecurity. So we did that by partnering with basic needs staff at 5 different UC campuses, and they recruited students who from the campus food pantry for our study. And these are the 5 campuses that were included, and it was predominantly female. We had undergraduates and graduate students included in our study, and they were racially and ethnically diverse, and most of them came from low-income families, and almost all of them had experienced food insecurity in the last 12 months. Next slide. So for the first phase, we had compiled all of those existing measures on housing insecurity and homelessness into a single survey. And then we gave that survey to the students and asked them to complete it. And then we conducted cognitive interviews asking them about their comprehension of these questions. And so we asked them about their understanding, how the questions made them feel, what they thought the question was asking, and what else would be important, what else they thought would be important to ask about housing and food insecurity, and then how they would ask a question if they were asking it of a friend. So in our focus groups, we started with the cognitive interview before moving on to talking about their experiences of food and housing insecurity. And with that, I will hand it over to Suzanna to talk about our findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, all right, so yeah, so as Erin mentioned, this segment here is our phase 1 findings. So we ended up, after the cognitive interview process and going back and forth with students and refining the tool and adding items and asking if they made sense, we ended up with a survey basically with 4 different modules, and I'll go through each of those. So the first module was focused on students' current and past living situation. This kind of lengthy module has 17 items, and it's really because we wanted to remove the term homelessness from the questions, just to remove that stigma. And then we also wanted to know more about the students, places that they had been sleeping, such as in the measure that was created by the CSU system. And then another thing that we did was we also revised the period that they had to refer back to. So in terms of, and instead of like in the last 12 months, we made it more relevant to the academic term. Okay, so here's just an example of how we rephrased the item regarding homelessness. So instead of asking, since attending UC, have you ever been homeless? Blah, blah, blah. We ended up changing that item and asking, in the last 12 months, have you ever lacked a safe, regular, and adequate nighttime place to stay and sleep for any of the following lengths of time? So then the student can answer yes or no. If they select yes, then they're able to select when in the year, what academic term or break was it that they had that experience. So here you can see there's fall, winter, spring, summer while in class, not in class, and then academic holidays. Sorry, there's somebody's phone ringing in the background. I don't know how to turn off. Okay, so okay, and then so then there's the housing. We're not quite sure what we're going to call this yet, but right now we're calling it housing insecurity, because there's ranges of it. It's like, so here, how we revised this long list that the CSU had originally designed or developed, we ended up building on that and not just adding more questions, but also clarifying. But here it says, in the last 12 months, have you slept overnight in any of the following places because you didn't have a permanent home to return to? So here students are able to report, if the questions are in black, that means that there were already questions that were on the CSU module. And then the pink ones were new items that we added to the list based on student feedback. So for example, students spoke about living on campus in places not meant for residents, so in a library or an office or in a lab. So we added an item about that. There was no language in the module previously, about staying in Airbnbs or home aways because they didn't have permanent place to stay. So we added an item about that. And then we also added an item about living in a room not intended for habitation. So whether that be in a closet or a converted garage or something along those lines. In module 2, we focused more on the on the challenges of housing. And so this module is about 21 items long. Here, I just will show you briefly. The pink, once again, are either new items or ways that we've refined an existing item that was already on this list. So here you can see we have, we developed, I guess we developed, there are 13 total items that we either revised or developed. And here we added items like you're unable to afford the full rent or housing costs. You lived with others beyond the capacity of the housing unit. So getting to the issue of overcrowded housing. It'll go, I won't go through each one of them, but there's examples of whether the student had to go into credit card debt because they had to pay for housing, if they had to pay for any kind of late fees because their housing, they couldn't pay their housing on time. So we try to hit like these different scenarios that to us might not seem like they would happen, but to the students, these are things, they're definitely issues that came up in their daily life and things that they had to weigh. So whether they had to decide to see a medical provider or pay for housing or pay for if they had therapy, like help for mental health, students had to really weigh like, okay, am I going to do this or am I going to pay for housing? And so these are some new items that we developed. Because overcrowding is a big major issue for students, we also created a module around overcrowded housing. So trying to get in so that we can also document this and see how this, doesn't just impact their academic performance, but whether it has any impact on their mental health. But here we added questions like, how many people do you live with in your immediate housing unit, excluding yourself? With how many roommates do you share a bedroom or a private living space? And with how many people do you share your primary bathroom? And these questions we developed mainly, we had a lot of student feedback, but we heard a lot of stories around students, like 6 students living in a studio or overcrowded housing, like having to share one bathroom when there's like 10 people in an apartment or something like that. If students live in a co-op, like there were that's crazy, but like in a co-op, like there was one bathroom to like 13 students. So we're trying to document these things in a better way because when students take UC surveys on cost of attendance, they might say that their rent is, let's just say $800 a month. But that's $800 a month because they're putting themselves in these situations to make housing affordable. Okay, and then our last module was really focused on food insecurity, and that's only because there's such a close connection between housing insecurity and food insecurity. And so one way that we, something that we thought was important to to include with the USDA food insecurity modules is also trying to get to the timing of food insecurity. So, depending on how you ask the questions around food insecurity, they're either asked in the last 30 days or in the last 6 months or in the last 12 months. In the UC system, we've been asking about food insecurity in the last 12 months, but that doesn't get anywhere to it doesn't speak to the timing of food insecurity. So we included a question here, which was actually adapted from our colleague at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. And this item just basically asks, how frequently have they experienced reduced quantity and quality of food? And they're able to respond never to often, and that's never to often for each of these either terms or breaks or holidays that also coincide with our housing insecurity questions. And so they can select one, all of these items and report what their not food insecurity, but at least it gives us an idea to the timing of when they experience food insecurity. Okay, so now I'm going to go on to our phase 2 findings, which were focused on based on our focus groups. So we conducted a total of 11 focus groups across the 5 campuses. We did I think at one campus we did 3 interviews, but for the most part we did about 2 per campus. We asked questions about what does the concept of basic needs mean to you, who's responsible for having your basic needs met. They told us about their current living arrangements, whether their basic needs were being met or not, and then we also talked about whether they were receiving housing or food assistance from any of the basic needs services provided to them on their campus, and then we asked them just how could the university better prepare for future generations, and then we ended with the question of what would you tell yourself. If you were in high school and you could give yourself a message or advice, a piece of advice for the future, what would it be? And even though that's kind of seems like an awkward question to ask, it was really interesting to hear what students said, and a lot of it had to do with get a job now, don't spend your money, get on an affordable housing list in high school, and it really spoke to the situation that each of these students was in. So from our focus groups, we had, and remember this was both undergraduate and graduate students. So our 8 themes across these groups was they're all really interesting in themselves, but they did all speak to basic needs and housing insecurity. And so our first theme that we identified was just that students define basic needs in a more comprehensive way than we were thinking about previously. So previously we were thinking more about basic needs as just being food and shelter, but students really spoke about it in a more holistic way. Students also talked about housing being a priority over food, which led to their food insecurity. We heard from non-traditional students, and what we're calling non-traditional students are those students who have to work today while being full-time students, or students who don't just go into college right away after high school, so they might do some community college first. So that's non-traditional first-gen students. But these non-traditional students and graduate students, they had unique challenges in addition to the challenges that all of these students were facing. And then we also found that just unnecessary university fees added to their basic needs and security. And that could just be like parking citations or a late fee for not paying this bill or something. So these students are already strapped, and then having these extra fees on top of this just didn't do them any justice. We heard from students around just the multifaceted issues around housing insecurity. Everything from the mental health component to the physical, the toll it took on their physical health. So that's all very interesting. And then of course, transportation barriers, depending on where students were situated. We take, I think for us in the Bay Area, we take public transportation for granted, because there's communities like UC Merced, where Merced isn't anywhere inside of the like Merced is outside. What is it, like 15 miles outside of the city? So there's no way that a student can like walk to campus, and so there was really big transportation barriers there. And then students also spoke about the financial aid just not being able to cover or help them meet their basic needs. It just, as we know, financial aid today mainly, like Erin shared earlier, covers tuition and fees, but it doesn't help students with the majority of the cost. And then lastly, students really did talk about the UC basic needs services that were provided on campus as being really important, but not meeting the needs of all students. So the need to expand. So I'll just go through a couple of themes or quotes that we heard from students. And here the student said, to be housing secure means you're not worrying about housing and it isn't affecting you in a negative way, such as the long commute from your house or how it affects your safety, or otherwise just the stress in the back of your mind. So here the student is really they're talking about housing insecurity, but at the same time, they're talking about like not having their basic needs met. And these are all of the things that we've heard from students when their basic needs are not met. Here, this student said, if you don't eat this week, it doesn't mean you can eat more next week. A lot of times people end up eating a lot for one meal and then skipping dinner for the day. We stretch out our meal plans for the week since we don't get enough for 2 meals. So here you can really see, just what, when students have to put most of their money to housing, this is the predicament that they're in. And so this student, even though they were in a residential hall because they're on a meal plan, it's still speaking to the amount of money that they have to pay for housing. And then they basically select the meal plan that's the most affordable. And at Berkeley, the most affordable plan only gives you like, what is it? I think 11 meals per week. So then, that's barely enough. That's like, 2 meals through the weekday, but like basically nothing on the weekend. So, and then here in theme 5, this one was really focused on our non-traditional students. So we have first-generation students who lack the parental guidance to navigate the university system. This is a real predominant theme at UC Merced. Being that Merced, there's many students who are first-generation there, and they lack that knowledge that you would get from your parent if you're like, oh, I don't know how to do this, I don't know, and usually a parent's going to tell you like, oh, like go talk to this person or go look for this person on campus, or or even help navigate financial aid forms and things like that. And so for these students, they had none of that support. We had student parents who, on top of having to have their basic needs met, they had to make sure the basic needs of their children were being met. International students who came from abroad, who just housing was just really hard for them. The system isn't set up for international students. They have to have all this like information that they don't have as international students, but that is required when you're trying to find housing. And then lastly, we had graduate students who we identified basically that they're not paid during the summer. They don't get their first stipends until the end of February. So these students are really strapped from like the end of the academic term until when they get their first stipend check. And so they're usually really backed up by the time September comes around. And then of course, students did talk about financial aid, not being, all of their financial aid going to tuition fees and rent. And then that's it, not much to help with anything else. And here the student says, all my financial aid goes to rent, and it doesn't cover a whole month of it. I don't touch it for anything else. And this is many students, not just one student. And another interesting thing that we heard a lot around this financial aid was just the lack of information, the lack of guidance, different messages, things like that. And then here's our theme about university basic needs being essential. And here the student says, I'll just say I was lucky to find out about the resources on campus early on, but I feel like it operated under the shadows. They don't have an ad saying we're available to help you. We kind of have to find these resources yourself. I feel like there are some resources that I may qualify for, but I don't know where they are or how to access them. So this is a medical student at UCSF speaking about, once they found out about basic needs services, they were really helpful, but until you find out about them, you're just kind of like, you're just struggling. So and hearing all of these focus groups and, our coding process and everything, one thing that we thought would be interesting to do is to try to kind of like map out how all of these issues connect. So, we spoke a lot about housing insecurity during our discussions, and these are just the many ways. So I have like, basically the blue is kind of, things that are like really focused on, when they were talking about housing insecurity, and then the green was kind of more how the outer, I don't know, like the things that contributed to it. And then here in the pink is like your worst case scenario, homelessness. But here we have like, let's say for instance, living far from campus to try to afford, to try to make college affordable. While we had many students do that, many of them felt socially isolated because they were so far away from campus. They didn't have the opportunity to like just go to campus and like be there and join a club and, be there every day. We had, because gas is either expensive or transportation was expensive. These students literally just came to campus just for class. They would stay there all day, then they'd go back home and they'd stay there until they had class again. So if you had classes 2 days a week, then that's the only time you were on campus. So it really did limit their opportunities for networking with other peers and joining clubs and things like that. And then another issue that came along with housing insecurity was just trying to find affordable housing and living in really unsafe areas. And that also, was connected to living in really poor conditions and also having really long commutes. We had a student who, I think they said for their first year, they commuted back and forth from UCI to LA, and it took them like an hour and a half each way, or like 2 hours and every day, like back and forth. So that's like 3 to 4 hours that they were on the road when that could have been like study time, right? So this is just kind of the way that we kind of wanted to like connect all the dots to see like, okay, how is all of this connected? It turned into like this cobweb, but it really does speak to the way that like all of these, like one thing leads to another, and that leads to another, and that leads to another. And so it really does speak to like the many challenges that students experience around housing. Okay, so that's our findings, and I'll just go, the next slides will show kind of how we've been interpreting all of this information. Okay, so based on our findings, this is how we see students defining basic needs, and so how we redefined it for higher education. So when students talk about their basic needs, they're talking about not just food, but healthy and sufficient food. They want safe and secure housing, peace of mind. Having safe and secure housing means that you're in a safe place where you can actually sleep at night and not have to worry about anything. Having transportation, because transportation is important to getting to campus and that's a basic need for students. And then also having, along with housing, just, a place where they can shower and do all of those personal things that they need to do. And they acknowledge that it wasn't just their responsibility to make sure that their basic needs were met, but also the responsibility of the university. And so when students spoke about housing security, which was an element of basic needs, they really did, highlight again, just this whole, this whole picture, safety, stress-free, a place to study, a place to cook, with, unlimited access to the kitchen, because when you lived in overcrowded housing, there were only certain hours that you could use the kitchen to like respect your other roommates. And then just a place, a safe place to sleep at night. And then once again, the hygiene. But we know that this is only possible when we have affordable housing for students. So not all students had, housing security. And then here is just kind of our, I don't know, it's kind of like our flow map, but we've been using this to show how basic needs really is coming in to like really support the students. So when students have limited funds and insufficient financial aid, that contributes to housing insecurity because all their money is going to housing, maybe lack of money to be able to afford food, or lack of transportation, or living long distance into more affordable grocery outlets, which contributes to their food insecurity. And in many ways, students in the beginning, before our basic needs programs were put in place, many students would rely on free food events when they were experiencing food insecurity. And this is like probably the first thing that students will do when they don't have money for food. So we heard many stories of students who they literally, like on their phone, on their app, every day had like this club free food, this club free food. And so they were really smart. They knew where to get food. But now we have our basic needs programs on every campus, and every campus now has a food pantry that is able to assist students. And then we also have CalFresh outreach, who are either students or staff, UC staff, who help students enroll, or at least assist them through the CalFresh application process. Okay, so these are our recommendations, and these are recommendations that we put forth to the UC system, and as well to the UC regents. I think that it's important to be able to monitor student basic needs in order to know whether the programs that we have been developing on each campus are really working. It's important for campuses and for the UC system to advocate for affordable housing for students. It's necessary. Also removing extraneous university fees that do more to hurt students than to help them. There's a better need for partner collaborations, or whatever we want to call them, with the city to create better transportation for our students. There's also a need to increase basic needs sensitivity training, or just cultural humility or something training for administrators, staff, researchers to really like help students. Because when students come to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm in need," we had students telling us, like, one student didn't have transportation to get to campus, and the financial aid advisor told them to buy a car. Well, just buy a car. And they were like, "Oh, okay, well, I don't have any money to buy a car." So, just sensitivity training around issues like that. Improving financial aid and loan literacy among students is also important. And then also improving and expanding on our current basic needs resources that we have available for students. Like many students said, they didn't know about it. So just trying to figure out how to disseminate and be more visible. And then lastly, continue to monitor beyond prevalence of food and housing insecurity in order to identify more modifiable factors in order to help alleviate basic needs insecurity. So that is it. I'm gonna stop sharing my slides really quick. And first of all, I would like to say thank you to everybody who contributed to this research. Lorraine was also a co-investigator on this, and so that's just want to say thank you to Lorraine for her guidance in this as well. Just really cool thing to show, but this is, let me figure out, not good at sharing. Okay, just to show you really quick, this is some of the ways that the information has been used. Okay, so this, I don't know if anybody has ever seen this before, but this is provided on the University of California website. So this is where the UC system, they basically put all their data that they have on students and make it available to the public because it is public information. For the first time in 2020, some of our housing and security module items were included in the undergraduate experience survey. And so if you go to this basic needs dashboard, we've been documenting food insecurity for a while already, since our first study. But now we have more questions on housing stability, housing insecurity, and here you can see, this is one of the questions that's in our new module. But how many times have you moved from one residence to another in the last 12 months? Moving 2 or more times is associated with lower academic performance based on the literature. And so here we can see the number of students who moved at least 3 or 4 times in the last 12 months. And so it's a large number overall. It's about 21%. And then you can see how that differs based on racial ethnic difference. And then here's all the reasons why students had to move, whether it was financial difficulty, landlord reasons, problems, contract ended, so on and so forth. So, and then here is our new question on housing insecurity. This is a little bit deceiving because it's by term, but one thing that we're trying to work on is for them to add in the last 12 months, whether they were homeless at any point in the year. So here it shows only that 3% reported this, but that was during the fall academic term. If we were to consider, how many said yes to at least some point in the last year, it would be somewhere around 7%, which is a big increase. It's almost double the percent that they had previously been reporting based on their old question. Have you ever, or were you ever homeless in the last 12 months? And then lastly, this is kind of cool. The regents of the university, they put together over the last couple of years a special committee on student basic needs. And in November 2020, internally, they released a report of student basic needs for the UC system, which was officially released to the public in January 2021. But if you were to go to page, I think this is page 2, this is now the new way that the UC system and that the regents are recommending that that basic needs be defined, at least for California higher education. So here it's an ecosystem that supports financial stability by ensuring equitable access to nutritious and sufficient food, safe, secure, and adequate housing to cook, study, to sleep, study, cook, and shower, healthcare to promote sustained mental and physical well-being, affordable transportation, and resources for personal hygiene care and emergency needs for students with dependents. So I will end with that. And if anybody has any questions, let us know.
Well, I would like to pitch in for a second and say what a good job I think you all have done. And then just 2 points I'd like to make. One, I know for me, what was a very powerful epiphany was to understand that college students aren't what I thought college students were. And I think to the extent that you can emphasize that these students are older, some have dropped out of school and are coming back, some have to intersperse work with their times at school. They have dependents, both younger and older than they are. All of that paints a picture which makes it clear that this is not some wealthy parent's child whom they're trying to shield and rip off the university about.
Mhm.
And then the second thing I'd like to say is that the work that you all have done really has resulted in significant policy change, which I hope will get included in any further work you do on this. At the moment, the rules in CalFresh that were preventing students from participating have been lifted. It's temporary, and there are now bills in Congress to permanently rescind those restrictions that required students to work 20 or more hours per week, which is very hard for a student to do. So in addition to all the other things that you could feel pleased about, I think a good policy outcome, or at least the glimmerings of a good policy outcome are really wonderful.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot happening right now, and as Ken mentioned, and it's not related to housing, but related to food insecurity. There is a bill out there. It's called EATS. I can't remember what it stands for. EATS. Maybe Erin remembers, but it's basically, like Ken says, it's a bill that's proposing to rescind the student rule. So that would have a huge benefit to students. And then in the last month or two, Governor Newsom just allocated state funding to improve CalFresh enrollment. And so the UC system got about $650,000. The CSU system got more because they're obviously a bigger system. So they got somewhere like around $1 million. And then the community colleges of California got another huge chunk of money. And so this money is going to be used to help just figure out, more student outreach around CalFresh, student enrollment. Erin and I and Ellie were actually also working, doing a study of CalFresh with eligibility workers, trying to understand just the process, the training, what goes on when they get a student application, and how is that processed? How are they determined eligible or not? And what barriers do students have, or do they see with students in terms of like getting through that last interview to get them on CalFresh? So we have that study underway. Laurel Moffitt, who was an NPI, well, she was an intern at NPI, right? She worked with NPI a couple years ago, and she did a summer project for credit when she was in her graduate program at UC Berkeley. She did the same study, but it was with our staff on the UC side who help students with CalFresh enrollment. And so that work, all of the information that Laurel gathered from doing interviews with basic needs staff across the 10 campuses, it really did provide us with like the information to know how to go about this new CalFresh eligibility worker study, because it gave us a glimpse into like what happens with the student, their application, where does it get stuck, how does it get stuck, where does the UC, like where do basic needs staff see, like how could the process be improved from the CalFresh side? So it really, like, having all of that information really did help us inform our research questions and how we were going to go about asking questions with the eligibility workers. So it's all good timing. I think we're seeing a lot of positive changes, and yeah, we'll see what we find out with all of that. But
Just a 5-minute warning for everyone.
okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Hi, Suzanna and Erin, it's so nice to see you. I'm curious whether you or anyone else is doing any work to understand how the stimulus benefit payments have impacted students and their basic needs over this past year.
I don't know. I know the only thing I know is Stephanie Bianco at CSU Chico. She has a large, I don't know if it's a state contract or a federal contract, and she's doing outreach with students for CalFresh. But I don't know. I don't know if she's included any questions in her surveys around the stimulus package or funding. We haven't been doing anything like that, but I think it would be important. I think it just kind of all has happened so fast, and it's just a matter of like where you are in the process, and you know how IRB is. By the time like you get IRB approval, like the moment's already passed.
Wendy, I don't know how helpful it is, but we found out that the child tax credit is not being used in figuring out eligibility for CalFresh. So that's a terrific move, and I don't know whether there's an analogy to this stuff.
Yeah, no, I was not worried so much about eligibility for programs as curious, like what a few $1,000s might do for students in the UC system or elsewhere, like how that, how that impacts food security and or housing security. What kind of amounts of money are we talking about that could actually be transformational for some of these students who are struggling?
Yeah, there's a lot of discussion right now around double the Pell. The UC system's a big, promoting that a lot right now. And I know Sean Brick, who's, financial aid director for UC system financial aid. I know he's been working more in that area. And from what I've heard, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think it's looking positive as far as I know, in terms of, or when we talk to our people who are part of state, federal, relations. So.
And in the work that you've done, like, do you have a sense of what proportion of the people that are reporting food or housing insecurity are Pell Grant recipients versus, other types of support recipients versus not qualifying for any aid? Or?
Well, we do know that the students, so we have about, of the students who are experiencing food insecurity, many of them are Pell Grant, first gen, and in general in the UC system, I think about somewhere around like 50 or 60% of students are on financial aid. And so it is a large chunk of the student population. So, it matches the demographics of just California in general.
Susanna, I can't tell you how proud I am that you took this little nugget of an idea that we had back in 2014 and turned this into not only an amazing set of research projects, but as Ken pointed out, some huge impacts with, and you're not even done. Do you remember, Susanna, way back when, after our very first survey, when we identified the 44% food insecurity, we met with President Napolitano's chief of staff, Steph Grossman. And you're not going to forget this either, Robert. It's such an interesting meeting. And Susanna and I showed him all the data, and then we said there needs to be a free and reduced price meal program in UC that's similar to how schools operate. And he just about fell off his chair at the price tag. But do you think now that we've moved forward a lot with the research, we've confirmed that number, the high percentage of kids that are food insecure, and we have shown multiple times now that the horrible consequences it has on student academic performance and ability to succeed. Do you see any movement in and I absolutely agree with the Pell Grant increase, but any movement towards the UC system creating a different way that they offer meal plans?
But I haven't seen anything. I think with COVID, I think everything kind of got like, I don't know, like the everything just changed. But I think because with all of this CalFresh stuff happening right now, I'm thinking that instead of having this like, kind of national school lunch program for college students rather than, that would extend from 12th grade. I think I'm seeing more around like just trying to get students on SNAP. I guess it just seems more logical. It gives them like more liberty. They don't have to be at school to have their meals. They'd be able to, buy their own groceries and so and then of all of the bills that I've seen that are, talking about something related to food insecurity, that's mostly where everything is being focused right now, is just making it easier for students to get on CalFresh. And I think the GAO report had a lot to do with that. Just because now it's like everybody, like it's being cited in all of these drafts that I've seen. So
yeah, Ken, you'll be happy to know people now do accept that student food and basic needs insecurity is a real thing, unlike in the old days when Suzanna started this work, where people would.
I didn't even believe it.
Yeah.
I still remember walking into Lorraine's office and just be like, I don't think I did this right.
Yeah, we looked at those numbers upside down and sideways. We sent them to the USDA to verify. It was crazy.
So,
well, thank you, Suzanna and Erin. Great job. It was great to see you.
Terrific.
So glad you guys are continuing to move forward on this topic, and can't wait to see what more good trouble you cause.
Well, yeah, you helped cause it, so you started it.
I just planted a seed. You guys took it away and ran, so kudos to you.
Thank you so much. It's great to see you all.
Yeah, good
Bye.
to see you. Bye.
All right.
Bye.